Good evening and welcome to Voice of BC. I'm Vaughn Palmer and we're doing one of our special topical shows tonight, and we're doing it on water in British Columbia and the threat to water and the shortage of water and our most valuable natural resource and all those other things. I think you're going to find this interesting because I'm looking forward to talking about the fact that there's great big chunks of British Columbia where there's a huge problem of water shortages and tainted water and corrupted water and wasted water.
We know that the massive diversion of water in Site C will be used to power natural gas extraction, shale gas, and shale gas is dependent on forcing huge amounts of potable water in the northeast of the province into the rock to extract the gas. It's a very questionable practice, and it will likely result in severe water shortages.
And welcome back to Voice of BC, and I want to deal with one more thing before we go on to the clips. So the Oil and Gas Commission in this province, and we talked about this fracking thing in the first bit, and you just saw George Heyman talking about it again there. The Oil and Gas Commission in this province produced a report on this issue, said it is no big problem. That was their view. And I gather, Ben Parfitt, they've offered you a briefing to sort of tell their side of the story and talk to you about it, but that hasn't happened yet.
Well, actually, I've offered to give them a briefing because I have significant concerns with the report that they released to the public, which, in my estimation, very slickly and I think deliberately misleads the public on the amount of water that is actually being used. It's very important, I think, for the public to understand that with the exception of the energy sector in this province, anybody that wants water has to go to the Ministry of Environment. Now the Ministry of Natural Resource Operations is taking that over that function. But the Oil and Gas Commission is the only entity other than the Ministry of Environment that gets to allocate water, and they allocate water to the energy companies. And I think that that's highly problematic. I think that if we're concerned about having a sustainable water regime in this province, we ought to be designating a responsibility over that resource to one ministry that can keep a firm handle on what the drawdown rates are. We don't have published data from the Oil and Gas Commission that shows how much water has been allocated to these companies, how much is being used. We don't have ready access to where the wastewater is being disposed, et cetera, et cetera. I know for a fact that there are very complex data sets that are maintained by the Provincial Ministry of Forests, for example, that pertain to all of the trees that are logged in the province. Very complex data set. So if the Ministry of Forests can do that, then the Ministry of Environment and the Oil and Gas Commission ought to be able to report regularly to the public on the amount of water that's being used, and that's my big concern.
I did get a question from within the government about whether or not the Energy Ministry or the Commission was going to get a chance to reply to some of the issues we were raising on the show tonight. And I mean, we do 42 shows a year. We have government ministers on, we have opposition, we do issues. But the point I did make, and I'm just going to say this now, is that the Energy Minister was going to be on the show, but the Premier fired him that day. So we didn't get to talk about this issue as much as we might have. But I'd like to suggest that's not Ben Parfitt's fault, and it's certainly not mine. We will get back to this someday when there's a more normal government in British Columbia and there's a new energy minister. I know there is a stand-in at the moment, but he's got his hands full with some other stuff. So that's just that issue, and there is, of course, with anything, another side of a story. If you go on the Energy Ministry website or the Oil and Gas Commission website, you can even read the report on it.
British Columbia, at least in most regions of the province, is a water-blessed jurisdiction. There are no shortages of water in most regions of BC, including here in the Lower Mainland. Despite that, some politicians and policy wonks are agitating for much higher prices to be attached to the use of water by BC businesses and residents. Isn't this really just another tax grab by governments looking for a new source of revenue?
Yeah, isn't it?
No. I think by raising the price of water, particularly when we look at very water-intensive industries like the fracking industry, it's a way to drive innovation, like what Oliver was talking about. So If we start to place a higher cost on the use of the water, and I can tell you that the rates that companies pay for water are very, very low.
Right.
Well, so, it's $1 for, let's say, 1,000 cubic meters of water used. That's almost half an Olympic swimming pool. You need to find a way to drive that cost up. And what's going to happen when you do that is that companies are going to start to get innovative. I mean, when I was doing my research on shale gas, I can tell you that people that are experts in industrial wastewater treatment said unequivocally, the wastewater that this industry produces is terrible water. They also said unequivocally that if companies spent the money, they could treat it to a point where they could reuse it. Is there a cost to doing that? Yes, there is. But the upside is that if you treat half of the wastewater, or if half the water comes back as wastewater and you treat it, that's half less water you've got to go find. And price is a way to start to drive that innovation. So I think we need to be looking at doing it for purposes of conserving water and getting industries to be innovative and practice the best practices that they can. And ultimately, they'll end up saving money.
There's a huge boom I keep reading about in shale gas all over North America. They're discovering it everywhere and they're developing it everywhere. Is there any place that's ahead of us in terms of managing the use of the water around it and having higher standards?
Well, I can tell you from what we've seen south of the border, where shale gas developments are much more advanced than here, that there have been problems after problems after problems in jurisdictions from everywhere from Texas to Wyoming and Colorado to Pennsylvania, and it is becoming a huge environmental issue in New York State right now, and it's all related to water, because where the shale gas industry wants to go in that state is into the Catskills watershed, which just happens to supply 8.2 million New York City residents with their water. There are some innovations that we're starting to see, and different regulators, state and federal, are starting to drive those changes, and I think we'll start to see that happen here.